What if XRP was never designed to make you rich quickly, but to quietly replace the way money moves across the entire world? That sounds extreme. But stay with me, because the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to ignore. For years, people have been watching XRP the wrong way. They stare at the price, waiting for sudden spikes, reacting to every dip like something is broken. But what if those price movements were never the real signal? What if they were just noise, masking something much bigger happening underneath? Because while retail investors panic and celebrate over small moves, something far more calculated appears to be unfolding behind the scenes. Not loudly, not publicly, but consistently. There have been legal battles, delays, and confusion, all centered around Ripple. On the surface, it looked like a fight for survival, but look closer and a different picture starts to form. A company that didn't disappear, a network that kept expanding, partnerships that didn't slow down. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because if institutions truly believed XRP had no future, why does activity around it never fully stop? Why do large amounts quietly move off exchanges? Why do discussions around global payment systems keep circling back to similar technology? These are the questions most people avoid. But once you start connecting the dots, you begin to see something else, something slower, more controlled, almost like a system being built piece by piece while the public is distracted. And if that's true, then what you're watching right now isn't a failed asset, it's a setup. So before you dismiss this, make sure you're seeing the full picture here on XRP On Moon. And if you want the truth behind what's really unfolding, make sure you're subscribed, because this is only the beginning. At first glance, the lawsuit looked like the end of Ripple. When the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission stepped in, the narrative was clear. XRP was under fire, exchanges began delisting, and fear spread fast across the market. For many, this wasn't just another case. It felt like a warning shot to the entire crypto space, and XRP was right in the center of it. But then, something didn't add up, because instead of collapsing under pressure, Ripple did the opposite. They pushed back, hard. Legal filings started revealing details most people weren't paying attention to. Internal communications, regulatory inconsistencies, and arguments that questioned how digital assets were being classified in the first place. And slowly, the tone began to shift. Certain rulings didn't just help Ripple. They introduced something much bigger, a level of clarity that the crypto market had been missing for years. Not complete clarity, but enough to raise eyebrows, enough to make institutions start watching more closely. Because this case was no longer just about Ripple. It was becoming a test case, a blueprint, a moment that could define how digital assets fit into the financial system going forward. And here's where things get even more interesting. While the public saw delays and uncertainty, behind the scenes, Ripple continued expanding. New corridors, new partnerships, new use cases, almost as if the lawsuit wasn't slowing them down, but buying time. Time for what? That's the question most people aren't asking, because if this legal battle was simply about stopping XRP, it should have ended momentum completely, but it didn't. Activity remained. Interest stayed alive. And key players never fully stepped away, which leads to a possibility that's hard to ignore. What if the lawsuit wasn't just resistant, but part of a larger process preparing XRP for something much bigger? And if that's true, then what comes next changes everything. If you only watch the charts, you'd think XRP has been stuck in a cycle of hesitation. Sharp rises followed by sudden drops, moments of excitement quickly fading into silence. For the average investor, it feels unpredictable, even frustrating. But when you step back and study the behavior over time, a different pattern begins to emerge, because this doesn't look like chaos. It looks controlled. Every time momentum builds, something shifts. Not enough to destroy confidence completely, just enough to cool things down. And while retail traders react emotionally, chasing highs and fearing lows, another layer of activity continues quietly in the background. Large transactions, consistent movements, and most importantly, direction. Blockchain data has repeatedly shown XRP being moved off exchanges into private wallets. Not small amounts, significant holdings. The kind of movement that suggests intention, not panic. Because when assets leave exchanges, they're usually not being prepared for selling, yet they're being positioned, and that changes the entire perspective. Because while the public interprets sideways movement as weakness, others may be treating it as opportunity. A phase where attention is low, emotions are high, and accumulation can happen without resistance. Analysts have pointed out something else too: XRP's ability to remain relevant despite constant pressure. News cycles come and go, narratives shift, yet XRP never fully disappears from the conversation. It holds a position that most assets lose over time. Why? That's where things start to get uncomfortable. Because markets don't behave like this without a reason. Patterns repeat when there's structure behind them, and structure usually means planning. So the real question isn't why XRP hasn't moved the way people expected. It's whether it's moving exactly the way it was intended to. And if that's the case, then what looks like stagnation might actually be preparation. Now, this is where the story starts to shift from speculation into something far more strategic. Because while most eyes are locked on price charts, the real movement has been happening elsewhere, inside wallets, across networks, and within institutions that rarely speak publicly. Let's start with the whales. Large XRP holders have been making moves that don't match retail behavior. Instead of rushing in and out of positions, they've been steadily relocating massive amounts of XRP into cold storage. These aren't panic-driven exits. These are calculated transfers, the kind that suggest long-term positioning, not short-term trading. And once assets move into cold storage, they typically stay there. Why would that matter? Because it quietly reduces the available supply on exchanges. Less supply means less immediate selling pressure. But more importantly, it signals that whoever is holding these assets isn't planning to let go anytime soon, but whales are only one part of this. The bigger shift is happening with banks and financial institutions. Ripple hasn't been idle. Behind the scenes, it has continued building relationships with payment providers, financial networks, and cross-border settlement systems. Some of these partnerships are public, others are less visible. Pilot programs, testing phases, quiet integrations, and here's where things connect. As the global financial system prepares for ISO 2022, a new standard designed to modernize international payments, institutions are being forced to upgrade their infrastructure. Faster transactions, more transparency, better interoperability, and Ripple's technology fits directly into that transformation, not as a theory, but as a working solution. So now you have two things happening at the same time, where whales are securing supply, banks are upgrading systems, and XRP sits right between both worlds. Coincidence? Maybe, but when supply tightens while infrastructure expands, it usually leads somewhere. The only question is, where? Now the story moves beyond whales, beyond markets, and into something much bigger. Because while crypto investors debate prices, central banks have been quietly working on a transformation of their own. Not announcements, not hype, but structured, deliberate development of digital currencies, CBDCs. And this is where things begin to connect in unexpected ways. Across multiple countries, central banks have been testing blockchain-based systems designed to move money faster, cheaper, and with more control. These aren't small experiments. They involve real infrastructure, real institutions, and real timelines. The goal is clear: modernize how value moves across borders. But there's a problem. Most CBDCs are being built within their own ecosystems, different countries. Different systems, different rules, which creates a new challenge. How do all these digital currencies communicate with each other efficiently? That's the gap no one talks about enough. Because building digital money is only half the equation. Moving it globally, that's the real test. And this is where Ripple's presence becomes difficult to ignore. Ripple has already been involved in multiple CBDC-related initiatives, offering private ledger solutions and cross-border frameworks designed specifically for interoperability, not replacing national currencies, but connecting them, acting as a bridge. Now here's where speculation begins, and it's important to see it clearly. Some analysts believe XRP could play a role in providing liquidity between these systems, not as a currency people spend daily, but as a neutral asset used behind the scenes to move value instantly between different CBDCs. There's no official confirmation of this, but the alignment is interesting. Because if a global network of digital currencies emerges, it will need something that can connect them all without bias. And XRP fits that description almost perfectly. So the question becomes harder to ignore. What if XRP's role was never meant to be visible to the public, but essential to the system itself? Now this is where the narrative becomes more controversial and far more difficult to ignore. Because when you combine everything, the lawsuit timing, the controlled market behavior, the whale movements, and the quiet expansion into global finance, a new theory begins to form. Not confirmed, not officially acknowledged, but persistent. It's called the hidden accumulation phase. The idea is simple but unsettling. What if XRP isn't being overlooked by major players, but quietly absorbed? Not through hype or public buying frenzies, but through slow, calculated positioning over time. Look at the patterns. Large amounts of XRP moving off exchanges. Long periods of low volatility, price suppression during moments that should have triggered stronger rallies. These aren't random events, they repeat. And repetition often points to structure. Some analysts believe this could be a strategic phase where available supply is being reduced while attention remains low. Because the less attention an asset gets, the easier it is to accumulate without resistance. No competition, no rush, just time. And here's where it gets even more interesting. If institutions were preparing to use XRP for liquidity on a global scale, they wouldn't want extreme volatility during that transition. Stability would matter. Predictability would matter, which raises a difficult question. Could the current market behavior be part of maintaining that balance? Again, this is speculation, but it's not baseless, because similar patterns have appeared in traditional markets before major shifts, quiet accumulation before sudden revaluations. The difference here is scale. If this theory holds even partial truth, the implications are massive, because it would mean the market you're watching isn't fully driven by emotion. It's being guided. And if that's the case, then the biggest moves haven't happened yet. They've been preparing. So after all of this, the lawsuits, the institutional signals, the whale movements, and the global financial shifts, one question still remains. What is XRP really positioned to become? Because if you only look at it through the lens of price charts, you miss the larger structure forming underneath. Markets rise and fall every day, but very few assets stay consistently connected to conversations about global payments, regulatory frameworks, and central bank experiments. XRP does, and that alone is unusual. If it were just another speculative crypto asset, attention would fade over time, narratives would move on, capital would rotate elsewhere. But instead, XRP keeps reappearing in discussions about cross-border liquidity, settlement efficiency, and financial modernization, not always directly, but consistently. And when you connect that with the broader picture, the legal clarity slowly emerging from the Ripple case, the increasing interest in ISO 2022 systems, the quiet accumulation patterns, and the ongoing exploration of CBDC interoperability, a different interpretation starts to take shape. Not a guaranteed outcome, but a possible direction. Maybe XRP was never meant to compete in the same cycle as retail-driven cryptocurrencies. Maybe its role was designed for a different layer entirely, one that operates behind the scenes, facilitating movement rather than speculation. And if that's even partially true, then the current market perception may be misleading what's actually being built, because sometimes the most important systems in finance aren't the ones making headlines. They're the ones quietly integrating into the infrastructure itself. So the final question isn't whether XRP will rise or fall tomorrow. It's whether we're already watching its long-term position being established without fully realizing it. And if that's the case, then everything you thought you understood about this asset might still be incomplete. This is XRP on Moon, and the story is far from over.